Tonight, tonight's selection is called "The Results Are In, Sort of," and we really welcome you to coming tonight to our St. Paul Learn with the League. These are monthly sessions that we hold in hopes of trying to find interesting topics that League members would be interested in. We would like to thank the Roseville and White Bear Lake area leagues for their support of our programs and encourage you to look at their websites. I'd also like to thank the SEC and SPNN for all of their help in broadcasting and taping our programs. Our land acknowledgement is just a small part of supporting Indigenous communities, and we hope that this inspires action. One option is individual voluntary support of the Minnesota Makoche Honor Tax Program, and you can see the reference there by a journalist named Zoe Jackson, who published an excellent article on this in the Star Tribune on 10/1. If you're watching on Zoom, please enter your questions into the Q&A bubble, and we'll try and get back to them at the end of the program. So why are we talking about the local election results from November of this year? Well, because we're the League of Women Voters, and elections are pretty much our thing. We care a great deal about promoting safe and secure ways for all eligible citizens to vote. We work hard all year to make sure of this. So why is the title, "The Results Are In, Sort of"? Well, because I was under the impression that the Secretary of State's office can simply snap their fingers and push a couple buttons, and they will spit out all the data that we're used to looking at about who voted, when they voted, how they voted, etc. And I've learned from our guest speaker that that just is not the case. So to help us understand some of the many recently passed laws, to hear about how many election judges it takes to run a smooth election, and to learn other tidbits about this November 7th election, we are delighted to have Melanie Hazelip, Voter Outreach Director from the Secretary of State's office. As you read her bio here, I'll quote her main approach to our community. "Democracy is not a spectator sport. We must all participate." Melanie Hazelip, welcome to tonight's program.
Hello, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. As Cheryl said, I'm Melanie Hazelip, the Voter Outreach Director for the Office of the Secretary of State. I can give you a little bit of background about who I am and the work I do in case you're unfamiliar. I have been with the office for about a year and a half now, but I've done voter engagement work since 2016. I began by co-founding a little grassroots voting rights group. We did very local, very grassroots organizing in 2016 around just voter engagement and voter turnout, and then advocacy work during the legislative sessions. I've also done some work with the League of Women Voters Minnesota, working under Michelle, and some campaign partisan side work in a couple of recent elections, but have been super excited to be at the Office of the Secretary of State, where I like to get paid for the work that I did for so many years as a volunteer. I also like to tell people that I have a background in social work, and this is important because it was the ethical values and principles of social work around seeking equity and social justice that I like to bring to my work here at the Office of the Secretary of State. Creating equity around access to the ballot is really something that I strive for every day. And I get to do that in partnership with so many amazing people, like the organizers of this call and those of you who are attending this call. I get to spend my days chatting with people all across the state who are also just seeking to make sure that their communities have access to the ballot. This is my first post-election presentation, so shifting gears from the Voter 101s that I did leading up to the election, and then also the legislative updates that we gave after, so many amazing laws were passed to expand access to the ballot. So bear with me, it's my first one. And like Cheryl said, we only have so much data to actually share. So I will start sharing my screen. I can also just tell you, though, I had shoulder surgery recently, so I'm operating with my non-dominant hand, and it's really messing me up. So if I'm moving slowly, that is why. But I'll try. All right, hold on just a moment. I'm moving with my left hand. It just doesn't move as quickly. Okay, there we go. I think you can all see that, right? So this is, the results are in, sort of, as Cheryl said. Just to get us grounded in what results we're talking about, I thought I would just show a slide letting you know which jurisdictions had local elections this year for 2023. There were about 20 I think it was 20 municipal elections and 30 school district elections for 2023. It's also just good to note that in odd years for local elections, there is vast differences in how many elections there might be from odd year to odd year. So 20 municipal elections and 30 school district elections is not necessarily the standard. It can really vary quite a bit from year to year. And let's just take a look at the things that we do know. Let's talk about the things that we do know for our election results, and then the things that we don't know, the things that we just don't have access to in an odd year. I really spent a lot of time talking with our data experts here at the Secretary of State's office to get a good understanding of why I was able to give you the results that I can and why I'm not able to give you other results that you might think that we would have available. So our website has a really great elections results page. And if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend checking it out. This is our results page for 2023. So you can see we have the estimated number of voters, the estimated number of voters registered on election day, and then the turnout in each county. There are all kinds of other ways that you can view this on our website. We have spreadsheets and maps and various ways that you can view this, but this is our elections webpage. One of the things that Cheryl asked me about was voter turnout, the actual overall voter turnout for this year. Our office is not able to, this is one of those that sounds, that it just doesn't seem like it would make sense, but our office is not able to give the actual voter turnout for an odd year because we actually don't have, our office does not have the common denominator of how many eligible voters there are in Minnesota for odd year elections. Across the country, elections officials and elections offices like ours rely on this U.S. elections project for voter turnout data. I click on it just so you can take a look. The professor of University of Florida, Michael McDonald, I'm sorry, he gives us this data. He compiles this data each year for every state. And he does this by using overlapping data from how many voters there are in each state of voting age. And then depending on the laws in each state, what eligible voters there are. So that would take into effect how many people there are that are immigrant status, or depending on their felony disenfranchisement laws, if they are allowed to vote based on their felony status, things like that. So he takes all of that data, which he would get from, corrections offices, demographers' offices, and then he overlays that data to be able to figure out how many eligible voters there are for each state. And it's kind of the nationwide standard is to use his data for eligible voters. He only provides that for odd years. So we don't have that common denominator of how many eligible voters there were in Minnesota for 2023. We do have that for 2022 and all of the even years, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that is a really great website to check out, Michael McDonald's records of voter turnout in all past even year elections for not only Minnesota, but you can compare them. He has them on a chart and you can compare them to other states across the country as well. And then if you're looking for more disaggregated data, I often refer folks to the Minnesota Compass. This is a fantastic resource that really disaggregates the data in ways that our office is not able to. So if you think about when you fill out your voter registration application, what information do we ask for? Our office only asks for your age, your date of birth, and your address and your name. That's it. So we're not able to disaggregate voting data any further than those data points. But as you can see here, the Minnesota Compass is able to. And part of the reason that we rely on the U.S. Elections Project and the Minnesota Compass is a capacity issue. If there are trusted resources, nonpartisan resources out there that is willing and has the capacity to compile this data, then we're going to rely on them. Our office is small but mighty, we like to say. So we have quite a small office in terms of staff and quite a small office in terms of budgetary resources. So we really rely on partners to help us with pulling together different kinds of data points. So one of those that we are not able to compile is the Restore the Vote turnout. Like I said, we don't ask for what your felony status is when you register to vote from our office. The counties will make sure that they do that check and that they will cross-reference that to make sure that those folks who are supposed to be eligible based on their felony history and those who aren't, make sure that we get the right people registered. The plan to get Restore the Vote turnout data currently is in the hands of some of our community partners. Some of the partners that worked really hard to pass Restore the Vote into law, that have spent years, if not decades, working to pass Restore the Vote into law, have now shifted their efforts to actual turnout. We don't want to only pass the law. We want to make sure that these voters are now voting and taking advantage of their newly found right to vote. We often talk about the 55,000 Minnesotans that this law impacted, that Restore the Vote impacted. And we want to make sure that not only are they now eligible and not only do they now register to vote, but they get out to the polls. We have a cautionary tale out of Washington that we like to tell, which had a recent law change similar to ours, Restore the Vote, so allowing folks who are no longer incarcerated the right to vote. And it impacted in Washington state about 24,000 voters. So not as many in Minnesota, but quite a bit, 24,000 newly re-enfranchised voters in Washington state. In the next election after the law passed, only 418 of them actually voted. And we really don't want that to be the case here in Minnesota. So we're working with partners, community partners. We've partnered with the DOC, the Department of Corrections, to make sure that these newly eligible voters know that their right has been restored. All of that to say, those partners will be compiling that data, overlapping that data to get the voter turnout, maybe not for this year, but they plan to for next year. We also don't have the youth voter turnout for this year. Because again, we didn't have that common denominator of how many eligible voters there were from the U.S. Elections Project, but we do have the number of pre-registrations that there were since June 1, when the pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds law passed. So since June 1st, when 16 and 17-year-olds were allowed to pre-register, we've had just over 2,000 16 and 17-year-olds pre-register. I will note that one tricky thing about pre-registration is that once those 16 and 17-year-olds turn 18 and their pre-registration becomes activated and they're fully registered, then they sort of just kind of become lumped in with all of the registered voters in Minnesota. So once they're 18, we'll no longer be able to track that they were pre-registered and not just a standard 18-year-old plus registration. I was able to pull together, excuse me, the turnout amongst registered voters in Minnesota for 2023. So notice that's for registered voters, not total eligible voters. We have, excuse me, the eligible voting population in 2022, we have that number, like I said, for the even years from the US Election Project, but we don't have that number for 2023. So I knew how many registered voters we had in Minnesota from our website and was able to figure out the turnout amongst our registered voters based on how many voters there were across the state. So 24%, it wouldn't be that high if you looked at it for the total eligible voting population in 2023. And then shifting ahead, that was probably not as much actual data on the election results as you would like, or I would like, but that's what I have. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Shifting ahead to look at our election dates in 2024. So we will have the presidential nominating primary, the PNP, on March 5th of 2024. That is the first election that will happen in 2024. And I will talk in just a moment a little bit more about what the presidential nominating primary really is. But important to note, early voting begins in January, on January 19th for the presidential nominating primary. So that's actually only about 54 days away, I believe it is. So early voting for the PNP is just around the corner. Then we'll have the regular primary election on August 13th and the general election on November 5th. So the presidential nominating primary, what is it? This is only the second year in Minnesota that we've had a presidential nominating primary. We used to have, for presidents, we used to have the caucus system, just like we do for local and statewide elections still, but now the presidential candidates have moved to a presidential nominating primary. Only presidential candidates participate. The local elections and statewide elections are still operating under a caucus system, and then only major parties participate in the presidential nominating primary. Excuse me, I've got something caught in my throat, so my apologies. Okay, so only the major parties will participate in the presidential nominating party primary, which for Minnesota is 3. We have 3 major parties: the Republican Party, the DFL, and then one of the marijuana parties actually just was relegated to a minor party, and I don't remember which one. We had 2 major marijuana parties, and one of them was just relegated back down to minor status, but one of the marijuana parties remains as a major party. Independents and minor parties don't participate in the PNP, but they would have to fill out a nominating petition in order to be on the ballot in November for the general election. And one question that we got a lot last year was about having to select one party in order to receive your ballot to vote in the PNP. We don't have party voter registration in Minnesota. As you probably know, you never registered with a party when you registered to vote. But in order to receive a ballot to vote in the PNP, you have to pick one party that you sign an oath that you agree with the principles of that party. And that is actually a rule from the legislature and from the political parties themselves. That's not a rule that our office has set. That's a rule from the legislature and the parties. It was the legislature that actually changed the law and shifted us from the caucus system over to the PNP system. The legislature passed a law that switched us to the PNP system. And so we heard a lot from voters in 2020. I say we, I wasn't with the office then, but from what I'm told, we heard a lot from voters that they really didn't like having to select one party in order to receive a ballot. And they were worried about both parties having access to their information and both parties having access to who selected which ballots. The parties were not willing to change that function of the PNP, but the one thing that they did compromise on is now only the party that you selected the ballot for will have access to your information. So in 2020, both parties had access to it, and now this year only the party that that you selected will have access to your information. Before I move on to that one, I did just want to show you, we do have a great web page on our website that goes into much more detail about the PNP. So if you'd like to check that out, we have that on our website. And then next, I wanted to talk a little bit about election judges, the organizers of this call. This was another data point that I wasn't able to provide. I checked in with our election admin team. The organizers of this call wanted to know how many election judges we had this past year, and I'm not able to give you that. It turns out that, like I said in the beginning, first of all, odd year elections vary greatly how many there are across the state in Minnesota. And then additionally, counties and local jurisdictions are not required to give our office their election judge reports of who served and how many they had served. They do have to in the even years, but not in the odd years. So all I can tell you is that we do need 30,000 election judges for statewide elections. So those even year elections. I always like to make sure people remember that you have a right to time off of work to serve. We have a form on our website that you can give to your employers. You also always have a right to be paid to serve. We often think of election judges as volunteers because many do volunteer, but you can always get paid. And then also like to let people know that 16 and 17-year-olds can be election judge trainees. They actually perform all of the same duties that a regular election judge does. They just don't have the same authority, but they do the same duties right alongside a regular election judge, and they learn every step of the process. And just like an 18 or older election judge, they have a right to time off of school and a right to get paid. So if you know of any 16 or 17-year-olds who are trying to get engaged in voting even before they're able to vote, this is a great way for them to participate. And just to highlight that we will need election judges for the presidential nominating primary. So if you're interested in serving as an election judge, or you have in the past, we will need election judges for the PNP. And the best place to start is either with your local county where you live. You can fill out an application through them. We do have a link on our website, but the counties do all the hiring of election judges, the hiring and training. Or you can also sign up with your political party. The counties will go to the political parties first to get the list of folks that have signed up through the parties to be election judges. So that's another way that you can sign up to be an election judge. And then I also wanted to make sure to spend a couple minutes before I go just addressing misinformation and disinformation. It remains something that our office is very focused on. I know Michelle Whitty, the executive director of League of Women Voters Minnesota, was just traveling to Greater Minnesota last night to combat some mis and disinformation that she was hearing from out there. We really need help from our partners, from you all, to continue to combat misinformation and disinformation. And transparency and public access are really the ways that we do that in Minnesota. They're the pillars, the 4 pillars of maintaining trust in our election system. The 4 pillars are public accuracy testing, post-election review, canvassing boards, and becoming an election judge. So number 1, public access to accuracy testing. Before every single election in Minnesota, every piece of voting equipment is tested. And some of these tests, not all of them, because that's a lot of pieces of equipment, but some of them are open to the public and the media. These are held all across the state they're open to the public and the media. Secretary Simon often attends them, and it's a chance for the public and the media to just watch the process, watch how these pieces of equipment are tested, what happens if something goes wrong, ask questions along the way. And the media will often report on these public accuracy testing as well. If you're interested in attending one, you can contact your local election office, the county or the local jurisdiction where you live. The number 2 pillar of trust is the post-election review that is conducted. So after every election, random precincts are selected, just completely at random. I've watched the process completely at random. Precincts are selected to hand count the ballots to make sure that the hand count in that precinct matches what the voting equipment had for the election results. And this happens at one precinct in all the counties. So they really make sure that the results that they're getting match up with what the tabulators have recorded. Next, we have the canvassing board, number 3. So if you were to go back to that web page that I showed you on our website with the election results, you would notice that it was unofficial results because the election hasn't been certified yet. Every year, about a month or so after the election is certified by a canvassing board, and they are comprised of, a mayor or county commissioner, just various public officials in the county comprise the canvassing boards, and they meet and certify the election. They go over what the election results are with our office, and they certify the elections. These meetings are always open to the public. They're often, during COVID, they were often streamed. They were always streamed. I think the last one was, but I'm not sure how long they'll continue to do that. But regardless, anybody can attend those meetings. And then lastly, we really just push for people to be election judges. When folks are expressing distrust in our election system, in order to push that we are transparent and that there is public access in our voting systems, that, hey, if you don't trust in the system, go be an election judge. Not only can you go, look under the hood and kick the tires of our election system, you can actually get paid to do it. You can go and see firsthand exactly how Minnesota elections are administered at the most foundational level. So that's a tool that I'll often use when I'm talking to somebody who's expressing distrust in our election system. And then we also have some social media graphics on just those things that I was talking about. We have a disinformation social media toolkit, which is just a great way to quickly and easily share quick bullet points of how our Minnesota elections are transparent and secure. And so now what? What do we do with this information? Whether it is information about the election results or information about the 2024 election or information about misinformation and disinformation, really advocacy works. I can't emphasize enough how advocacy on these issues, whether you are Michelle Whitty, the ED of League of Women Voters Minnesota, going from county to county, helping spread the word against misinformation, or just a volunteer. Like I said, I started off doing this work as a very local grassroots organizer, and advocacy really does make a difference. Going back to the issue of restore the vote and giving the right to vote back to those who have committed felonies but are no longer incarcerated, that happened because of decades of advocacy work from organizations, community members, people who were directly impacted, people who had committed felonies and were out on parole and out in the communities, directly impacted. We're doing the advocacy work. It really does make an impact, especially in a setting like this. League of Women Voters is nonpartisan and trusted. And when you do the advocacy together and you build power together, that really makes a difference. And next, like I said, especially with disinformation, just helping us spread the word, helping our office spread the word. We have an incredibly information rich and resource rich website. Our office is very accessible. You know, you'll all have my contact information by the end of this call. And if I don't have the information, somebody in the office does. I can always find it. Somebody in the office does. But we have the info, and we just need help getting it out there. We need help spreading the word. The organizers like you who are on the ground are the trusted messengers in your communities, especially, you know, different communities like the young voters, or communities, you know, maybe it's a community of color, or a community that is justice impacted, like the Restore the Vote voters. You know, the trusted, the person they want to hear from is often not me, and often not my office, but often you, the organizers, often the people who are on the ground in the communities. So we really rely on you to help us spread the word with those social media graphics or the toolkits that we have available on our website. Hosting sessions like this, I'm always happy to host sessions on a variety of topics. Just really helping us get the information out to the communities across the state is really what's helpful. And then, like I said, that is my contact info. That is my cell phone number right there. I'm always happy to hear from anybody, phone call or a text message from anybody with any questions or ideas or feedback. If there's a resource that would be helpful for you all as organizers for our office to create, if we can create it, we will. A lot of the resources we have are based on community input of what we're told that communities could need for information and for resources. So please, I can't emphasize enough, don't hesitate to reach out if you ever have any questions. Then I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Melanie. The St. Paul League just really appreciates all of our government officials who work for clear legal access to the polls. And I know you have given countless educational talks all over the state in your role as outreach director. So we really appreciate that. And thank you for clarifying why the results are not exactly in. We did have one question. If you could just repeat the whole reason why we don't get information on the odd years compared to the even one, why do we not get the denominator?
So yes, so we get the denominator from the U.S. Elections Project. Professor Michael McDonald gives us that denominator. And I just had a long conversation in the office today about this. Like, that seems like a thing we would do. Why don't we do that? We're the Secretary of State's office. And the way that was explained to me was for something like 25 years, Michael McDonald, hoping I'm remembering his name right, but he had been the person that at one point said, I can do this. I can put this information together for you. Like I said, it requires overlapping data. You know, it's not just how many people above the age of 18 are there, it's how many people also are United States citizens, and how many people based on the Restore the Vote, you know, now versus then, whatever that law was or is in each state. So then you're overlapping data with the demographer's office, or the U.S. Citizens Immigration Office, the Department of Corrections. It's not necessarily an easy thing to just quickly pull together. And so when he came out years ago and said, I will do this as a nonpartisan, you know, I will put this together for everybody, most of the states were like, okay, thank you. We don't have to, you know, like I said, we're a small office. We actually have very few resources in our office. I was a party of a team of one for most of the year and a half here that I've been here doing outreach, you know, the outreach person for the entire state for the office of the secretary, you know, so we don't have the capacity. And Michael McDonald has been considered trusted. He's, you know, he's never gotten it wrong. And it also gives, it actually, for some, they feel that it gives a little bit more credibility if a third party is putting it together, putting this denominator together for all the states. And so we know that, you know, people, that there's not any funny business, that there's no shenanigans. So for example, in 2022, Minnesota slipped to number 3 in voter turnout in the nation, just by a fraction of a percentage point. And so, like that fraction of a percentage point didn't come from us or the other states. It came from this third party trusted source. And then finally, he only does it in even years. He doesn't do the denominator in odd years.
If we could get back to the shenanigans, I would like to kind of flesh out what you had mentioned about Michelle Whitty, because she sent an email to all league members describing what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And what she said was, there are groups that are literally passing around brochures. This particular township meeting she went to, they wanted to vote on changing how people voted, and they wanted it to be only in person allowed, no more mail-in. She said, that's a legitimate conversation to have, but why did they want that? And they wanted that, according to the brochures, because they're conflating two recent things that happened. One is called driver's licenses for all. That was somewhat controversial, of allowing people who are not documented citizens to get driver's licenses. That was one bill, one law that changed. The second thing was automatic registration when you apply for your driver's license. And so the brochure said, all of these people are going to automatically get a ballot in the mail, which is absolutely not true. And so when you ask league members, if everyone on this call can just hear unequivocally, that is not true. People who are not US citizens will not get a ballot, even if they have this driver's license. And so that's the kind of thing that she said, I had to go to the meeting, and so I had to back up why we have all of these checks and balances.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to offer about specifics like that?
Specifics about that particular issue?
About the driver's license and how that just can't be, that a person will not get a ballot who's not a naturalized citizen?
Yeah. So ballots in mail-in precincts are only mailed to eligible voters. You're only on the voter rolls if you're an eligible voter. You only become an eligible voter because you have proven that you are eligible. And one of those things that you have to prove is that you're a United States citizen. So when you think about the last time you went to the DMV and you were either renewing or getting a new driver's license, how much documentation did you have to show, right? Like you have to show. I didn't even get a real ID because it was too much, and I gave up and I said, forget it, I'm not going to get a real ID. But they will not give you a driver's license unless you've shown that you are they will not register you to vote unless you have shown your US citizenship, your United States birth certificate. Now non-citizens are able to get their driver's license, but they're not going to have their United States birth certificate, right? They're not citizens, they don't have that. So they will show their birth certificate from their home country. That won't be a birth certificate from the United States, so they won't be registered to vote. The important thing to remember with automatic voter registration is that it's not actually automatic. It's the same exact behind the scenes process of checking the eligibility of every single person who is being registered to vote. We have real people behind the scenes doing the exact same checks of eligibility that we've always had. So it's not just, plug it into a system and people are automatically registered. There are still the real people behind the scenes checking. Yes, they've shown their United States birth certificate. Yes, they've lived in Minnesota for 20 or more days. And then depending on if they're, 16 or 17 and being pre-registered versus 18 and being registered. And the other thing that we like to note too is that this isn't a new phenomenon in Minnesota. The pool of applicants has expanded with driver's licenses for all, but we've had people in Minnesota getting driver's licenses who have been here on a green card. For example, Secretary Simon talks about his mom. She was here on a green card. She was not an eligible voter, but she was eligible to have a driver's license. So it's not a new thing for the DMV to be doing these references and to be doing these checks to make sure that voters are actually eligible.
I think I've worked as an election judge for a couple of years, and since we can register people in Minnesota the day of with proper documentation,
Yep.
I think many people forget, once they've been registered for years and years, they forget that you have to, the very first question is, are you a US citizen?
Yes.
And will you be 18? And
Yep.
all of the other data that we get with social or driver's license, et cetera. And then everyone signs when, now that we've all done this electronically, maybe it's something that's different when we had the big old paper sheets that you had to find yourself and sign. But what you're signing is that all of this is true and that you continue to be a properly eligible voter, and that there is a very stiff penalty and it's a felony to lie. So we
Yep.
sign that every year.
Yep.
And as election judges, we've got it printed everywhere. We try and say, this is what you're signing, here's the oath. And many people told me, oh, I don't remember doing this. And I'm like, you've done it every time you
You've
voted, every
absolutely
time.
done it. Yeah. And it's like you say, it's a steep penalty. It's up to $10,000, up to 10 years in jail. It's a felony. And if you're a non-citizen, you're going to be deported. People
Right,
aren't risking that. People aren't risking that to vote.
right.
And I always also point out that I'm hearing the concerns equally loudly from both sides of it, where there are those who are worried that people who shouldn't be voting are going to be voting, and we're going to have voter fraud.
Right.
And then there are people in the undocumented communities who are worried that they're going to get accidentally registered and they're going to get in trouble, and then they're going to get deported. Yeah. So they're just as worried about it over here as they are over here from the opposite side. But really, just continuing to highlight that voter's oath. And also, if you're an organizer, the league does a lot of voter registration drives. If you're an organizer doing a voter registration drive, when you're registering voters, you're asking them, are you eligible? That eligibility, those bullet points remain the same as they are on the voter's oath. Just really make sure you're highlighting those, because people don't want to, they don't want to face that penalty.
Right. Here's a quick one. I think you did mention this, but are 16 and 17-year-olds paid to be election judge trainees?
Yes.
Yeah. And
yeah. So
that's
the hook
same
is
amount?
What's that? I believe so. Actually, I'm not sure. That's a good question, but I believe so. The counties are the ones who pay election judges. But if you're trying to get 16 and 17-year-olds to serve, just tell them that they can skip school and get paid.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you, my 16-year-old did it. She signed up to do it again. She had a good experience.
Awesome.
So yeah.
We had a question: in other states, the results of elections are posted at precinct locations. Is that something we do? They wanted to know if we could do that in Minnesota, but we do it. All of the voting places that I've done, as soon as we tally this, we have to tape it up as a public record. I don't know if you can comment on more about this. Results of elections at precinct locations.
I don't know about that. I can, if you'd like, I can inquire with our
we
our
do
elections
as an election
okay.
judge, we make 2 tapes. The ballot counter will do that. We tape up one, and there will often be a precinct, someone from a group or a candidate who's waiting quietly. They have to wait until 8 o'clock when the polls close, but then the public is allowed to see that strip.
Okay.
They can't take it, but they can see the strip, and that is the unofficial, of course, and we stress that with them. This is not official. Yeah. This has to be the exceedingly boring next 2 things that you mentioned: the canvassing board and the post-election review have to happen first.
Yeah.
So we do that. Here's a great question: is there a prediction about the 2024 election, aside from huge? What are you gearing up for in the Secretary of State's office for 2024 for the main election in November?
What do you mean by prediction? Like, for what kind of metrics?
Amount, turnout.
Oh, I mean, we certainly hope so. Like I said, we slipped in 2022, just barely. We're now behind Maine and Oregon. But behind both by just a fraction of a percentage point in 2022. I can tell you Oregon made sense to me because they have all mail-in balloting across the state in Oregon, and that tends to yield higher voter turnout. And they also had some really compelling ballot questions on their ballots for 2022. Maine, I couldn't quite figure out how we slipped behind them that one, and nobody I've talked to can figure out why on that one either. But so we're really, I mean, we're all hands on deck trying to make sure that we get back to number one in voter turnout. I am happily expanding my outreach team here. I'll have a youth voter specialist coming on board very soon to specifically try to increase youth voter turnout, and then at least one or two more other outreach people. So, you know, there seems to be just real interest and momentum in voting and democracy in the United States in the last several elections. And so there's really no reason to see that dissipating before the election in 2024. It's going to be a wild ride.
Well, there's clearly presidential and all of the other national offices. When do we have to have ballot questions into the Secretary of State? Do you know that? How, because we don't know any ballot questions right now in, you know, a year before next year's ballot, but how much time does the state require? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, you have to get I believe you have to get the correct number of signatures in order for it to become a ballot question, but I don't know what the deadline is. I can look into that if you'd like.
Okay. We have a question about the process from the Secretary of State's office on when a voter moves. So if a voter moves and registers in a new location, does that name automatically get deleted from the previous address?
Does the name automatically get deleted? So the voter rolls are updated to remove that voter from that address. Is that what you mean?
I think that's what the question is.
Yeah.
And they want to know, is the county communicate this, or is it to the Secretary of State? I know when we're doing with the poll pads, we can change people's addresses. I even want to say we re-register them, because it's not, unless it's an error, if it's just a typo, you know, avenue is spelled AEV or something, we can do that. But I think when there's a change of name, sometimes people come in and they've changed name after change in marital status.
Yeah.
You have to actually re-register them, because it's and all of that data gets refreshed.
Yeah, and even if you move from apartment A to apartment B within the same apartment complex, you need to re-register. So the voter rolls are updated at the county level. I can tell you the county does that. We don't do.
They're refreshed that way.
Yeah.
Here's a very honest question. The viewer wondered if the Secretary of State is seeing threats from the public. Any worries about that? Can you talk to us about what the tone has been in your office?
Yeah, there hasn't been too much in Minnesota. There were one or two incidences of election judges being hassled, or actually, I don't even know if it was an election judge. One, I think, was an election official at a county level, but really not too much in Minnesota. There were, I mean, even in 2023, there were several Secretary of State's offices that were sent some mail that had suspicious powder in the mail, and I actually don't know what that ever ended up being.
Yeah,
and
there was fentanyl.
Oh, was it? Oh, geez. So we were on high alert, you know, but we never saw that here in Minnesota. It's really been okay. But we did pass one of the laws that was passed this year was explicitly outlined in state statute that you cannot harass or intimidate or interfere with an election worker's job. That is now explicitly outlined in state statute. That was one that we had thought would pass last year. Like, why wouldn't that have bipartisan support? We want to protect our election workers, but somehow it didn't make it through in 2022, but the legislature did pass it this year. So we've largely been we've largely felt safe here in Minnesota, but also just wanted to make sure we put those protections in place just in case.
Here's a question back to the a non-citizen getting a driver's license, and if they on purpose or mistakenly came to a polling place on voting day, on election day, and showed their driver's license, and you know, we always ask, are you registered? And that gets you to the polling people who are not registering. And if the person says, no, I'm not registered, they'll go to an election judge who will then register them. And we ask for ID and they will give their driver's license. How does the election judge know that that's not driver's
So
license for? Is it on the license so that they'll know that that's not a form of ID that can be accepted?
no, so one of the major points that the advocates of driver's licenses for all really pushed for was no identifying factors, because they were worried that members in the community would be harassed if there was something on the ID that identified them as undocumented. So they really stuck to that. They really pushed for that. So an undocumented, a non-citizen could in fact go vote on election day. They could present their driver's license and they could register same day. We have election day registration. One of the beautiful things about Minnesota elections is election day registration. They could use that driver's license. There would be no way for the election judge to know. That's where we're really wanting election judges or voter registration organizers to really emphasize the eligibility bullet points. Are you a United States citizen? Have you lived in Minnesota for 20 days? Are you 18 years or older? Really, really emphasize those eligibility bullet points, that voter's oath it is on election day. And that person would, if they say, no, I can vote, here you go. They would be able to cast a ballot. Yes, they would not get away with it. That would come back to them. They would, that vote would be cast, but that voter would not, they would end up facing up to 10 years in jail, up to $10,000 in fine and deportation. So
how would the county or Secretary of State's office find that ballot and know that it was wrongly cast?
So the ballot would be cast. The ballot, that wouldn't be able to be pulled back. The ballot would be cast. The voter themselves would be found out.
Oh,
So when they go to, the same day voter registrations are all processed at the county level and they're all cross-check, they're cross-referenced with all it's getting to be close to my bedtime and I just lost the word that I'm looking for. The databases. We have multiple databases in Minnesota that we use to cross-reference eligibility for the statewide voter registration system. And so eventually that voter would be found out, but that ballot would be cast.
okay. One question, this Michael McDonald is getting a lot of interest and we want to know what's going to happen when he calls it quits and says, I can't do this anymore. I've done it for 25 years.
That came up. I know that actually came up when I was talking in the office about it today and it was unsure and I think a little bit of panic just in our office, but yeah, so I can tell you, like I said, we slipped just by a percentage of a point in voter turnout in 2022. His website was the one that we kept going back to. Secretary Simon was constantly sending us the updated link to his website about what the overall voter turnout was. Like he really is the gold star for that data. So I'm not going to think about that question right now.
Okay.
I don't know.
We will inquire about his health and send good thoughts his way.
Hopefully he's mentoring somebody. He's got somebody yeah.
Two more questions for us. One is an easy one. Is it true that names of voters are deleted from the rolls if votes have not been cast in 4 years? Does Minnesota call our voting registration if you have not voted in 4 years?
It's possible. It's not an automatic. So we often encourage folks if they haven't voted in more than 4 years to make sure they re-register. It's possible, but it's not automatic. We don't, like other states, we don't purge the voter rolls in quite the same way.
Yeah. I think this will be our last question. And again, thank you so much. What advice or requests do you have for us as a local league in supporting the 2024 election process?
Yeah. So like I said on that second to last slide, it's just really helping us get the information out there. So you know your communities best. We have I mean, I'm still finding pages on our website. I've been here for a year and a half. I've done voter engagement work since 2016, but we have so much great information and so many resources on our website that I still now will find one. I actually just for preparing for this presentation, my boss sent me a link about the presidential nominating primary. That was not the one that I had been referencing. So you know what your community needs, and so we really rely on you to get that information to them, to know what do they need. Do they need the election dates? Do they need to know how to register? Do they need to know about automatic voter registration and how it interacts with driver's license fraud? Like whatever it is it how you know your community best, and really helping us get our resources into the community. I always emphasize that because we're nonpartisan, you can add our resources to any community event. It doesn't have to be a voting specific community event, an election specific. I always have all kinds of information at our national block party. It's just a great place to just provide nonpartisan information. So any type of event, just provide the information. And then, keep helping us fight disinformation and misinformation. We kind of had hoped that maybe it was going away after 2022, because the election denier candidates all kind of did go away in Minnesota. Those who lost didn't cause a stink, and they didn't, deny the outcome of the election. They kind of just quietly went away. And so we had hoped that maybe the trend would, but it doesn't seem like it is. And so really just making sure that nonpartisan trusted messengers continue to get the information out about how our elections are secure. The other thing that I didn't add, we have our great fact versus fiction page on our website that covers the most prominent falsehoods that people spread about our elections, and then what the truth is, and then really digs into where you can find the answers to what the truth is. So that's really the best thing that we can ask for, is our partners just really helping us continue to spread the word. And hosting more events like this. I'm always happy to come back if you have another topic, or if there's somebody else in the office that makes more sense. But just however you can help us continue to get information out there is really good.
Well, and like Michelle Woody had said, go to township meetings. If you hear something in your district, in your precinct, that is somebody's having a meeting, go to them and be the voice of reason, or at least listen, report back to your leagues, report back to the state Secretary of State office if you're hearing something that just clearly doesn't make sense and you didn't feel comfortable rebutting it and didn't feel like you necessarily had the authority to do so. It's helpful to have that information.
Yeah, quickly I can tell you the League of Women Voters in Northfield hosted a town hall or a forum or something, and it was open to the public, and some election deniers came. And at the end of it, the organizers of the League of Women Voters event hesitantly but willingly engaged in a conversation with the election deniers, and it ended up opening this ongoing conversation that's still happening to this day between the election deniers and the League of Women Voters Northfield. And they continue to chat and talk and try to find where their common ground is. So that's a perfect point, Cheryl. Just have those conversations wherever you can.
Well, thank you. I'm using my dominant hand, and it's probably going to take me 45 minutes to share my screen, but here we go. Thank you. Thank you. So we really appreciate you coming, Melanie, especially choking and being post-operative and all of the above. We really thank you for coming. And to all the participants who stayed on the call and listened, we thank you as well. Believe it or not, as Melanie told us, the presidential primary is coming up. Did I have the right dates? You had told us earlier, but the early voting is going to happen in January. And also in January, we'll get back with our Learn with the League with we've invited the 4 newly elected school board members. There were 4 people who won the vote on this, and so they'll be coming. It's always on a Tuesday at 7 p.m. and this one will be on January 23rd. You know about the League of Women Voters. We're nonpartisan. The organization's been around for more than 100 years. We study issues, we take positions, and we take action. And please think about becoming a League of Women Voters. And there are all sorts of religious holidays coming up. And in a shameless plug for the St. Paul League, wouldn't the membership for your child or grandchild be a wonderful gift? We would love you to join us if you're listening and haven't become a member of the League of Women Voters. Again, thank you to Roseville area and White Bear Lake area for giving us their support, and also the very important local TV networks, SCC and SPNN, have just been fantastic for us. And you can watch this program in a couple of days on our YouTube site, and you can see previous programs. And I'm not going forward. So we're going to leave it there. Thank you again, Melanie, for coming. Thank you, viewers. Have a lovely, lovely evening and good night.